Chapter 9, Practical Skills. 9.1, How to Find Laws Practically. I am now going to share some of my personal strategies for finding and reading laws in New Zealand. First of all, to get an overview of where laws can be found, a textbook is a good place to start. A textbook should tell you the main statutes or cases relevant to a certain area of law. 9.2, Finding and reading statutes. All statutes can be found on the New Zealand legislation website. Statutes are usually split into different parts. They generally start with the title of the act. They sometimes have what is called an interpretation section, which defines some of the words in the statute. That's because a statute might use a word in a different way to the word's ordinary meaning. For example, in the Employment Relations Act 2000, which relates to people who are employed in New Zealand, the word court in the statute means the employment court. So you have to check the interpretation section to know what some of the words mean. If you want to understand an act, it's good to just skim over the act quickly to get a general idea for the different parts of the act and what it's made up of. For example, this act has all sorts of different parts relating to different areas of employment law. If you want to find a particular section that's relevant to you, for example, let's say you want to find out about terminating employment, I often actually check a textbook first to find out all the relevant sections of that statute. Let's say you wanted to find all the laws related to collective bargaining, which is like group protesting. You could go Control F and type in collective bargaining. This will show you what titles in the act have those words in them. If you want to find a key word that is not just mentioned in the titles of the act, but that might be in a word within each section, you can type that into the search bar at the top. As you can likely see, statutes are a bit overwhelming to read. The wording is super complicated and they're usually quite long. Therefore, sometimes before I read a statute, I'll read part of a textbook or an article online explaining how that statute is structured and how it works practically. 9.3, Finding and reading cases. Sometimes cases are public and you can find them on Google. However, sometimes to find a case, you need to be signed up to a database like LexisNexis or Westlaw. I won't get into how to use these databases because university libraries provide really good training on that. But personally, I usually just type in the name of a case or the area of law into the search bar at the top of one of these databases. In terms of how to read cases, here are a few of my practical tips. If a case states that one party in the issue is R, that means Regina, which means the Crown. So it basically means this person against the government. In New Zealand, the V is pronounced V, not versus. A case will often have a front cover page, giving some information about it, like what court the case was heard in, who the judges were, and who the parties were. A case citation will usually say at least the year the case was decided and what court the case was decided in. For example, it might say 2022 NZHC, which means the New Zealand High Court, and the case was decided in 2022. The judge or judges' names will come up with their last name followed by the letter J, like Mellon J, which means Judge Mellon. Multiple judges or justices decide cases in the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. However, only one judge decides on cases in the High Court and the District Court. Some judgments have a table of contents at the start of a case, like in this case. Other judgments don't have this. Cases will normally begin by talking about the background facts of a particular case. In other words, two or more parties are having a problem. That's why they're in court. The judge will normally explain what the problem that they're having is in detail. This is called setting out the facts of a case. A judge will normally then explain what the relevant law in the case is. A judge will then generally say what her conclusion is, or in other words, how those people's problem should be resolved. I sometimes use Control F and type in words like conclusion, to conclude, or decision to quickly find what the decision of a case was. (9.4) How many cases should you read? The more cases you read, the better your understanding of the law in general and that particular area of law will be. However, since we don't have unlimited time and energy, as a practical tip, I recommend reading at least the main case in an area of law that you're studying in a lot of depth. Then you can read extra cases on the same topic a bit quicker. This is because if you read the main case in detail, the judges tend to explain that area of law and how it's applied in a lot of detail. So it'll give you a good idea of what that area of law is about. Once you understand the law, you can then check other cases to see how the law was applied in different fact scenarios, so you can read them a little bit faster. 9.5, cases with more than one judge. In cases in the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, there are 3 or more judges, or justices as they're called in those courts, deciding on a case. There's always an odd number of justices, like 3, 5, or 7. The case is decided by what the majority decide. For example, if 2 justices decide that a party in a case should win, and 1 justice disagrees, that party wins. So to find a decision in a case with more than 1 justice, you need to see what the majority decided. A case will normally say what the majority decided at the top. Justices can sometimes agree on the main issue of a case, but disagree on other bits that aren't relevant to determining the main legal issue of that case. This is just something to watch out for.